recording. So once again, just to let you know, we're reading from The Innovators, a book by Walter Isaacson, who wrote the Steve Jobs biography, made a lot of money, and then this is the thing he wanted to write. And introduction, it says how this book came to be. The computer and the internet are among the most important inventions of our era, but few people know who created them. They were not conjured up in the garret or garage or by solo inventors suitable to be singled out on magazine covers or put into the pantheon of Edison and Bell and Morse. Instead, most of the innovations of the digital age were done collaboratively. There were a lot of fascinating people involved, some ingenious and a few even geniuses. This is the story of these pioneers, hackers, inventors, and entrepreneurs, who they were, how their minds worked, and what made them so creative. It's also a narrative of how they collaborated and why their ability to work as a team made them even more creative. I got to tell you, that surprised me. The tale of their teamwork is important because we don't often focus on how central that skill is to innovation. There are thousands of books celebrating people who were biographers, portrait, and mythologize and lone inventors. I think he's referring to his own Steve Jobs biography right there. I've produced a few myself. Yeah, for sure he is. Search the phrase, the man who invented, quote, on Amazon, and you'll get 1,860 book results. But we have far fewer tales of collaborative creativity, which is actually more important in understanding how today's technology revolution was fashioned. It can also be more interesting. We talk so much about innovation these days that it has become a buzzword drained of clear meaning. So in this book, I set out to report on how innovation actually happens in the real world. How did the most imaginative innovators of our time turn disruptive ideas into realities? I focus on a dozen or so of the most significant breakthroughs of the digital age and the people who made them. What ingredients produced their creative leaps? What skills proved most useful? How did they lead and collaborate? Why did some succeed where others failed? I also explore the social and culture forces that provide the atmosphere of innovation. For the birth of the digital age, this included a research ecosystem that was nurtured by government spending and managed by military-industrial academic collaboration. Intersecting with what was a loose alliance of community organizers, communal-minded hippies, do-it-yourself hobbyists, and homebrew hackers, most of whom were suspicious of centralized authority. Histories can be written with a different emphasis on any of these factors. An example is the innovation of the Harvard IBM Mark I, the first electrical mechanical computer. One of its programmers, Grace Hopper, wrote a history that focused on its primary creator, Howard Aiken. IBM countered with a history that featured its team of faceless engineers who contributed the incremental innovations from counters to card feeders that went into the machine. Likewise, what emphasis should be put on great individuals versus the cultural currents has long been a matter of dispute. In the mid-19th century, Thomas Carlyle declared that, quote, the history of the world is but the biography of great men, end quote. And Herbert Spencer responded with the theory that they emphasized that the role of societal forces. Academics and participants often viewed the balance indifferently. Quote, as a professor, I tended to think of history as run by impersonal forces, end quote, said Harry Kissinger, told reporters during one of the Middle Eastern shuttle missions in the 1970s. Quote, but when you see it in practice, you see the difference personalities make, end quote. When it comes to digital age innovation, as with Middle East peacemaking, a variety of personal and cultural forces all come into play, and in this book, I sought to weave them together. The internet was originally built to facilitate collaboration. By contrast, personal computers, especially those meant to be used at home, were devised as two tools for individual creativity. For more than a decade, beginning in the 1970s, the development of networks and the home computer proceeded separately from one another. They finally began coming together in the late 1980s with the advent of modems, online services, and the web. Just as combining the steam engine with ingenious machinery drove the Industrial Revolution, the combination of the computer and the distributed networks led to the digital revolution that allowed anyone to create, disseminate, and access any information anywhere. Historians of science are sometimes wary about calling periods of great change, quote, revolutions, because they prefer to view progress as evolutionary. Quote, there is no such thing as scientific revolution, and this is a book about it, is the wry opening sentence of the Harvard professor Stephen Shapin's book on that period. One method that Shapin used to escape his half-joking contradiction is to note how the key players of the period, quote, vigorously expressed the view, end quote, that they were part of the revolution. Quote, our sense of radical change afoot comes substantially from them, end quote. Likewise, more of us today share a sense that the digital advances of the past half-century are transforming, perhaps even revolutionizing the way we live. I can recall the excitement that each new breakthrough engendered. My father and uncles were electrical engineers, and like many of the characters in this book, I grew up in the basement workshop that had circuit boards to be soldered, radios to be opened, tubes to be tested, and boxes of transistors and resistors to be sorted and deployed. As an electronics geek who loved Heath kits and ham radios, I can remember when vacuum tubes gave way to transistors. At college, I learned programming using punch cards, and recall when the agony of batch processing was replaced by the ecstasy of hands-on interaction. In the 1980s, I thrilled to the static and screech that modems made when they opened for you the weirdly magical realm of online services and bulletin boards. And in the early 1990s, I helped to run the digital division at Time and Time Warner that launched the new web and broadband internet services. As Wordsworth said of the enthusiasts who were present in the beginning of the French Revolution, quote, bliss was it at the dawn to be alive. That's cool. I began work on this book more than a decade ago. It grew out of my fascination for the digital advances I had witnessed, and also from the biography of Benjamin Franklin, who was an innovator, inventor, publisher, postal service pioneer, and all-around information networker and entrepreneur. I wanted to step away from doing biographies, which tend to emphasize the role of a singular individual, and once again do a book like, quote, The Wise Men, which I had co-authored with a colleague with the creative teamwork of 6 friends who shaped America's Cold War policies. My initial plan was to focus on the teams that invented the internet. But then I interviewed Bill Gates. He convinced me that the simultaneous emergence of the internet and the personal computer made for the richer tale. I put this book on hold until early 2009, when I began working on a biography of Steve Jobs. But this story reinforced my interest in how the development of the internet and computers intertwined. So I soon finished that book, and I went back to the work on this tale of digital age innovators. The protocols of the internet were devised by peer collaboration, and the resulting systems seemed to have embedded in the genetic code a propensity to facilitate such collaboration. The power to create and transmit information was fully distributed to each of the nodes, and any attempt to impose controls on the hierarchy could be routed around without falling into the teleological fallacy of ascribing intentions of a personality to technology. It's fair to say that a system of opening networks connected to individually controlled computers tended, as the printing press did, to wrest control over the distribution of information from the gatekeepers, central authorities, and institutions that employed scriveners and scribes. It became easy for ordinary folks to create and share content. No, it's not theological. It's teleological. Teleological. The collaboration that created the digital age was not just among peers, but also between generations. Ideas were handed off from one cohort of innovators to the next. Another theme that emerged from my research was that users repeatedly commandeered digital innovations to create the communications and social networking tools. I also became interested in how the quest for artificial intelligence, machines that think on their own, has consistently proved less fruitful than creating ways to forge a partnership or symbiosis between people and machines. In other words, the collaborative creativity that marked the digital age included collaboration between humans and machines. Very interesting. Finally, I was struck by how the truest creativity of the digital age came from those who were able to connect the arts and the sciences. I'm going to take a pause here. Marry an artist. If you're a hacker or if you're a geek, fucking marry an artist. Rob Pike did. Aiken did. So many people have done this. Finally, I was struck by how the truest creativity from the digital age came from those who were connected to arts and sciences. They believed that beauty mattered. Shayla, absolutely. Quote, I always thought of myself as a humanities person as a kid, but I liked electronics, Jobs told me as I embarked on his biography. Quote, then I read something that one of my heroes, Edwin Land of Polaroid, said about the importance of people who could stand at the intersection of humanities and sciences. And I decided that that's what I wanted to do. The people who were comfortable at the humanities technology intersection helped to create the human-machine symbiosis that is the core of this story. Like many aspects of the digital age, the idea that innovation resides where art and science connect is not new. Leonardo da Vinci was the exemplar of the creativity that flourishes when the humanities and sciences interact. When Einstein was stymied while working out the general relativity principle, he would pull out his violin and play Mozart until he could reconnect to what he called the harmony of the spheres. When it comes to computers, there is one other historical figure, and not well known, who embodied the combination of the arts and sciences. Like her famous father, she understood the romance of poetry. Unlike him, she also saw the romance of math and machinery. And that is where our story begins. Anyone want to guess who it is? Anyone want to guess where the story begins? What historical figure embodies the romance of math and machinery more like any others? The daughter of the famous poet? The daughter of a mother who forced her to take mathematical tutoring, even though it was a man's world? Much before Woz. Way before Woz. I'll give you another hint. She looks like this. When they make her dress up to take a picture, she looks like that. Ada. Ada's story is so amazing. And I've already read Ada's section in here, so I'll read it again. We'll save it for another night. Ada's story, if you think you know Ada Lovelace from just looking at her picture here, you don't. That's all I have to tell you. This was her dressing up for a painting. Most of the time she dressed like a guy. And she was completely irreverent, and she was really funny, and she was super smart, and she was super narcissistic. And, you know, the daughter of Lord Byron, who's a gallivanting, horny philanderer and poet. Bad poet, by the way. Yeah, Robin Williams makes a joke about being teased by bullies in his school, and they would kick copies of Byron in my face. It's a quote from Dead Poets Society. Because Byron is not regarded as one of the greatest poets of life. But that was her dad. So we will read more about Ada Lovelace in the next episode of Artibix Rob Reads the Innovators. I know you want me to read more, but that's all you get. So there. That's all. That's all for tonight. That's all we get for tonight. Okay. Good night.